We've reached the midpoint, my friends. 1995. Middle of the 90s. It was a good year, actually. A lot of technological advancements and changes were released that year. We had some good music come out, some fun sports events, some great books, and of course, we can't mention 1995 without some of the fun movies that came out. So let's jump into it with news and events. In the tragic news, the Oklahoma City bombing. So this was on April 19th. Timothy McVeigh set a truck bomb in a federal building, killing 168 people, injuring 500. It didn't take the FBI long to catch him. So the bombing happened on the 19th, and the 21st, they arrested him. I mentioned him previously when talking about the Ruby Ridge standoff in Waco. Timothy McVeigh actually went down there and was one of the sign holders and was inspired by that event to plan this bombing. And it didn't take him too long to do it. Luckily, he was caught and put in jail for this. On the fun side, depending on your point of view, we saw the first Riverdance show by Michael Flatley. So this was February 9th, so right at the beginning of the year. It opened up in Dublin, and it was a craze. If you remember 1995, 1996, even into the late 90s, Michael Flatley and Riverdance was a thing. Like, everybody was doing it. People were taking classes. They'd go to, like, clubs and do Riverdance and stuff. It was a total fad for a while. It was ridiculous, but it was also kind of fun, and they really enjoyed it in Ireland. I think at one point they tried to do the longest Riverdance line world record, so all kinds of stuff. Now, you don't really hear about it too much other than people making jokes about Riverdance. The Bosnia War ended. So this went on from April of 1992 to December of 1995, so a little over 3 years, 3.5 years. They had what was called the Dayton Agreement, and it was signed in Paris by the leaders of the various governments ending the conflict in the former Yugoslavia, which included Slobodan Milosevic, I think I mispronounced that, and others, including Bill Clinton. So this was a tragic war. This was one of those genocidal events with people killing one another and all kinds of hostility with the different sides. And it took a long time to recover from this. They had military tribunals and international tribunals convicting people of war atrocities during this event. So the Bosnia War was quite tragic, and so it was nice to see that it ended. Additionally, O.J. Simpson had his trial. I've, of course, talked about him in past episodes. So the trial was actually held on January 12th. He was found not guilty for the murder of Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman. This led to a lot of people complaining about our judicial system and how basically if you're rich enough, you can buy your freedom. Me being one of those people. Of course, his supporters cheered the fact that he was released because they believe that he's innocent. Everybody has an opinion on this. I think, honestly, we'll never know, especially now that OJ is no longer with us. I've talked about the Oslo Accord in past episodes, and I'm just going to mention it really quickly here. Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated in 1995, so he was Israel's prime minister at the time. He was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize in 1994, along with Yasser Arafat and Shimon Peres for the Oslo Accord. And unfortunately, it fell apart because of these assassinations and all that nastiness. Let's jump over to technology. And in September of that year, eBay was founded by Pierre Omidyar, O-M-I-D-Y-A-R, so however you'd say that, Pierre. We still use eBay to this day. eBay has been pretty impressive in its longevity. So we see a lot of like technology sites come and go and that kind of stuff. And so it's pretty impressive that people still use eBay. I don't think they use it as much anymore because the cost of shipping has gotten so high to where now if you buy something on eBay, the cost of shipping sometimes costs more than the item you just bought. So I used it back in the day. I would buy stuff through there and sell stuff through there. I don't really use it anymore, though, for that reason. If I sell something on there, the amount of money I'm spending on shipping and the time and stuff just doesn't really make it worth it to me anymore. But it's still used. People still buy and sell on it. So there's definitely some advantages to it. And I'm glad that it's sticking around, because if it ever goes under, well, then that kind of limits us to Amazon. And Amazon's kind of already taken over the world. So it's nice to have a company that is still around and not owned by Amazon selling stuff online. Windows 95 was launched. It's in the name, 1995. August 24th, 1995. It was a major change in the computer world. Pretty much all of the Windows versions since then, well, I don't know, maybe the previous version as well, but it was really a major improvement over previous versions. It worked a lot better. It allowed you to install other software and peripherals much better, had the taskbar and start menus, and in the first 4 days, it sold more than 1 million units. And it basically became installed on every PC since. You've got Windows, you've got your Apple operating system, and you've got Linux, and that's about it. And only the true, proper tech geeks use Linux. A friend of mine used it, actually, and he was really proud of himself for installing and using it. I'm a Windows guy, what can I say? The PlayStation game console was released in 1995, now known as the PS1, because it was the first one of it. So it was released in Japan in 94 and later to the North American market in September of 1995, just in time for Christmas. I got one not in 95, I think I got mine in 96 probably. I loved my PlayStation 1. I thought it was fantastic. It had the CD-ROM instead of the cartridge system. It had great technology. We had a past episode debating which was better, the NES at the time or the PlayStation. My argument then was the PlayStation, and it is now. So check that episode out if you want. I used the PlayStation 1 up through the PlayStation 3, and then when my PS3 broke, I pretty much just have an Xbox now. I don't play games as much as I used to. If I did, I'd still probably have a PlayStation because it is a great gaming system. How about music? You want to talk about music for a second? Recently, in the news, we heard that Oasis is doing a reunion tour. Two brothers who don't seem to like each other too much. But once in time, they did. And that was when releasing their first album, What's the Story, Morning Glory. It sold 347,000 copies within its first week. So they were part of that British invasion, and it was a great album. They kind of got a bit full in themselves, comparing themselves to the Beatles. And yeah, the Beatles eventually broke up too, but they also released a few more albums before they broke up, whereas Oasis broke up pretty quickly. And to my understanding, most of the guys in the Beatles actually still liked each other even after the band broke up. They would occasionally hang out and that kind of stuff. They just wanted to do their own thing. Whereas the Oasis boys, the Gallaghers, kind of didn't really like each other all that much after they broke up. And it's taking a very, very long time for them to get back together. My guess is they've started running out of money and they need to do another reunion tour in order to make some green. But back to that album in 1995, it had some great songs on it. Wonderwall being one of them, Don't Look Back in Anger. A lot of good stuff was released on that album. I had a copy of it back then on the CD, and I really enjoyed it. I'm not enough of a fan to where I'm going to go spend all the money on the reunion tour tickets. And What's the Story, Morning Glory, it appears on several albums of greatest albums of all time. Rolling Stone ranked it 378 on its 212 list of 500 greatest albums, 157th on its 2020 list, so it's always on the list. Spin Magazine put it 79 on their best 300 albums. And these lists course just over time, every time they release one. But the point is that it's generally considered one of the top albums of all time. And you might not realize this, Frank Sinatra was actually still around in 1995. He did his last concert, February 25th, before a live audience of 1,200 guests at the Palm Desert Marriott Ballroom in California. It was the closing night of a golf tournament, and he was getting up there and unfortunately had to retire from touring. So Old Blue Eyes had his last show. Another revolutionary album, Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette, won the Grammy Award in 1996. It was her third album, but it was certainly her most successful album. And that had a lot of great songs as well. You Ought to Know, You Learn, Hand in My Pocket, Ironic, all kinds of good stuff. It was one of those albums where, as a guy back in the 90s, you're like, oh, I'm a dude. I don't listen to cool rock music and, grunge and stuff. And I remember having a conversation with a guy I was a friend with at the time, and we were talking about Alanis Morissette. And I was like, I hate to admit it, but I actually really like Alanis Morissette. And he basically said the same thing. He's like, yeah, I don't think I could admit it, but it's true. And it is true. It's great. Now I don't mind admitting it. Now I don't care what people think of the music I listen to. But back then it was like, oh, that's chick music. Now it's like, that's great alternative rock music. And Alanis Morissette rocks. And it was a good album and deserved all of its awards and success. And for the last piece of music-related news, we lost Jerry Garcia, August 9th of 1995. He was only 53 at the time. He had a heart attack. He wasn't a healthy guy. I mean, you can kind of see that just by looking at him, and I would imagine all the touring and drugs and alcohol did its toll on his body. So personally, I was never much of a Deadhead, although I do appreciate the band. I think they were all very talented, including Jerry Garcia, obviously. And it is a sad loss because he was quite young at the time, and they could have kept touring for a while and putting out great music. And it was really sad for all the people that are fans of the Grateful Dead. But they, of course, left a legacy of music for stoners to listen to. On March 18th, 1995, Michael Jordan returns to the NBA. So he took a year and a half off to see if he could make it as a baseball player and didn't do too well. And then on top of that, they had the baseball strike. And so he decided to go back to the sport that he excels at, and that is basketball. His first game, he played with the Bulls against the Indiana Pacers. He scored 19 points in that game. It had a very high rating for people watching the game, of course, because the man is back. He did not wear his original number, though. Actually, the Bulls retired it. That's how great of a player he was. So he went and played with his baseball number, number 45. On March 28th, he scored 55 points against the New York Knicks in Madison Square Garden, and the Bulls went 13-4, making the playoffs. In those playoffs, he switched back to wearing his former number, 23. The Bulls played against the Orlando Magic, and even though he played pretty well, averaging 31 points per game, Orlando did still win the series in 6 games. So the Bulls played well, Jordan played well, but not well enough. But the next season, of course, they did really well, and, maybe I'll talk about that a little bit when I get into 1996. I talked about the baseball strike in the previous episode. That did end April 26th. As mentioned, Jordan wanted to play baseball but couldn't because of the strike. So it ends. Baseball's back, although not too popular. As I mentioned previously, a lot of fans of the sport were quite disgruntled by a bunch of rich people fighting over more money. Hockey had a strike as well. Again, I mentioned that in the previous episode, and that ended as well. Not as big of news. Monica Seles, on July 29th, beat Martina Navratilova in her return to tennis. So in 1993, she was stabbed by a fan of one of her opponents, so she had to take a lot of time off, have a lot of surgeries, and this was her return. So everyone was quite happy to see that she was playing and playing well. And finally, in sports news, Mike Tyson returns to the ring. He had served 3 years in prison. I mentioned that previously in a previous episode. He beat Peter McNeely in 89 seconds. So I remember this quite newsworthy because he hops in the ring, couple punches, McNeely goes down, and everybody's like, wait a minute, I just paid a crap ton of money to watch this fight, and that's it? It's over? Yeah, you did, people. Sorry. This was on pay-per-view, as well as, of course, obviously, the fight, and this was back when pay-per-view was a big way that people watched sports. In the world of books, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was released, and The Lost World by Michael Crichton. The Lost World, of course, was the sequel to his 1990 novel Jurassic Park, and was later turned into one of the Jurassic Park movies. The book did really well. Lots of people loved it. Blah, 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 blah. That book. Let's jump over to television. Star Search ended. 1983 to 1995 version of Star Search, I should say, because it was picked up again in 2003 after the whole America's Got Talents and American Idol and all of those types of shows picked up. It didn't last very long, but the 83 to 95 version did. It was hosted by Ed McMahon, who you might remember from Johnny Carson fame. So it was the precursor, actually, to these talent shows. So they would have categories, different categories, too. So it wasn't always just singing. They would have best female singer, male singer, junior singer, group vocals. They did dance, comedy, which was a big one I remember because you don't really see a show where they're doing comedians. And they would have each of the categories on a show. You'd watch the whole show, and then they would do the voting and that kind of stuff with the judges, and they'd give them stars, and they would get contracts and money and all kinds of cool stuff. So it was the precursor to a lot of these modern reality talent show contests. Star Trek Voyager premiered in 1995 as well. So I like Star Trek Voyager. I know a lot of the DS9 people kind of hate on it in the way I hate on DS9. We've talked about this in the past on the podcast, so you can check that out. It went from 1995 to 2001. It had its ups and downs. I'm not going to say it was a perfect show. It certainly didn't have great episodes, but all of the Star Treks had good episodes and bad episodes. I think it had more good than bad, but you be the judge. Another show premiered in 1995 that you might not know if you're in the US, Father Ted. So it ran from 95 to 98, so a very short show. It was written by Arthur Matthews and Graham Lenham, starring Dermot Morgan. So why am I mentioning this show that you probably have never seen? I moved to Ireland in 2013, and one of the many things people mention to me when living there is, have you seen Father Ted? So it follows three priests that live in a house on an island, and it's just kind of your cheesy Irish BBC slapstick comedy type stuff. It did win some awards. It won BAFTAs. It won the British Comedy Awards. It won National Television Awards. So it won a lot of awards. And it's a fun show. It's stupid, but stupid fun. And if you ever go to Ireland, I guarantee somebody will probably mention, have you seen Father Ted? Side note, Graham Norton of The Graham Norton Show actually appeared in 3 episodes of that as a priest. The cult classic Xena, Warrior Princess, starring Lucy Lawless and Renee O'Connor, debuted. It ran till 2001. It was kind of a ridiculous show, but also a lot of fun. And I should point out, Ted Raimi appeared in quite a few episodes. You also had some other well-known people occasionally show up on the series, like Bruce Campbell, who appeared in a couple episodes. Yeah, it was fun. It was kind of stupid, but it was also kind of fun. And of course, everybody had their pick, which they liked better. Were you a Lucy Lawless person or a Renee O'Connor person? Were you into the tall, muscular brunette or the petite blonde? It won 1 Primetime Emmy, actually. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I think it's ridiculous, but also kind of fun. Another one that appeared in September 24th, is Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, starring Jennifer Eel and Colin Firth. So this debuted in the BBC, actually in the UK. Why am I mentioning this one again? Another show that debuted in another country besides the US, because there are other countries beside the US. Americans, get used to it, accept it. But also because my wife just made me watch this. I've, throughout doing this podcast, have talked her into watching a lot of crappy 80s and 90s B movies and sci-fi movies and cult movies, which I think are great. And so in retaliation, she made me watch Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. I suffered, but I made my way through it. In the world of movies, Toy Story. November 22nd, the first feature-length film created completely using computer-generated imagery. Starred Tom Hanks and Tim Allen. It was huge. It has made numerous sequels since, and it's great. I loved that film when I saw it. It's still a lot of fun. I've kind of lost interest after a few of the sequels. Maybe I've aged a bit too much, or I don't know. I've just kind of lost interest in it, but the first one was a lot of fun and really an enjoyable film. Braveheart was also released that year, won 5 Oscars, including Best Picture. Travel through Scotland, and anytime the word Braveheart comes up, they will point out the lack of accuracy in that movie. It's not accurate, but it's still a fun movie. And I went and saw it with some friends in the theater, and I remember one of my friends was quite upset by the ending because he didn't know the actual story of what happened to William Wallace. And so when it ended on a bit of a sour note, he was quite sad about it. But it's a great film, and say what you will about the accuracy of the film or Mel Gibson's personal life, I still like it. I still think it's a good film, and it's good to watch. October of that year, we saw Leaving Las Vegas, directed by Mike Figgs and starring Nicolas Cage, a film that he won a Best Actor Oscar for. It also starred Elizabeth Shue, and I loved this film. I, of course, was a theater nerd anyways. I was in college, and this movie came out, and I was so impressed by Cage's performance in it. He really deserved that award. Elizabeth Shue deserved much more credit than she got. Mike Figgs for the writing. The music to the film, I bought a copy of the script so I could learn dialogue from it. That's how much I loved this film. It is sad and depressing, but also beautiful. Speaking of sad and depressing, Seven, directed by David Fincher, starring Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt, and Kevin Spacey. What's in the box? Come on. You knew as soon as I mentioned Seven, I was going to say what's in the box. If you don't know what's in the box, then that means you've never seen the film. Or if you don't know the saying what's in the box, you've never seen the film. Because technically we don't actually see what's in the box. Or do we? Gonna have to watch it again to find out. And in a piece of sad news, which I'm going to squeeze in here, Christopher Reeve was paralyzed from the neck down after falling from a horse in a competition. May 27th, Christopher Reeve was Superman. Superman apparently is not invincible, and it was quite sad. He's a very talented actor and quite an impressive person from the sounds of it. He really liked sports. He really liked horse riding, and it was quite sad. I think those of us that grew up on the Christopher Reeve era of Superman kind of just viewed him as Superman, you know. And so when that happened, it was sad. And he did other great films as well. I should point out, he went to Juilliard. So that says something about his talent as an actor. He was good friends with Robin Williams, in fact. And when he was paralyzed, Robin Williams pretty much instantly contacted him and did his best to cheer him up. And Reeves had actually said that without Robin helping him out, that he might have been worse off. He starred in some good films that I really liked. Noises Off, which is a stage play, actually. It's a good stage play. I auditioned for it once and did not get cast, actually. But it was kind of my own fault. I didn't take the audition seriously, and I can't blame the director for not casting me in the role. Another great film, if you haven't seen it, of Christopher Reeve is Somewhere in Time. So it was released in 1980, and it follows this guy who hypnotizes himself in a hotel room to go back in time, and it's a lovely film. The comedy Clueless was released. I liked that film. It's, again, stupid fun. It was directed by Amy Heckerling, starred Alicia Silverstone, who every boy had a crush on back in the day, myself included. It's ridiculous as if like it could be any more ridiculous. And sure, nowadays modern audiences have to pick stuff apart like they always do, which means they have to pick apart the relationship between Paul Rudd's character and Alicia Silverstone's character. Brittany Murphy was in it. She was so adorable. It's too bad she died at a young age. Donald Faison of Scrubs fame. A lot of great cast members in that film, and it's fun. It's stupid and ridiculous and hilarious, and I would absolutely watch it again. I have the soundtrack for it because, as I mentioned previously, I tended to buy a lot of movie soundtracks back in the 90s because they had good soundtracks. And the last one I will mention, GoldenEye, the 17th James Bond film. This was the first one starring Pierce Brosnan and the first one featuring Judi Dench's M. This was probably one of the best James Bond films. Now, I would argue that some of the Sean Connery ones are up there as well. Certainly the best Pierce Brosnan movie as James Bond, and I'm going to say it right now, and get as mad as you want. GoldenEye, better than any of the Daniel Craig ones. That's right. I know the Daniel Craig ones everybody loves because they're so gritty, but they're not James Bond. You know, they're action flicks. James Bond has style and character and cool gadgets and charm. And nothing against Daniel Craig. I really enjoy his Knives Out movies, and he's a very talented actor. But Pierce Brosnan, GoldenEye, top of the picks. It's fantastic. It has everything from classic James Bond to new James Bond. Unfortunately, the movies went downhill. People try to blame him for it. It wasn't his fault. He didn't write them. They just got more and more ridiculous, and so that's why they had to end the Pierce Brosnan era and switch over to the dark and dreary and dramatic and serious Daniel Craig era. It also spawned one of the best video games of all time, GoldenEye. If you haven't played it, well, then I guess you probably weren't alive back then, but it was awesome. And it looks like I should probably wrap this up, so I'm going to end it by saying, as usual, like, subscribe, follow, share, comment, all that usual stuff. And I'm out of here because I'm going to go find a copy of GoldenEye and play me some video games.